Welcome to Principles of Marketing. This is Module 14, posted for a little bit of a delay. Thank you for your patience as I rescheduled our guest speaker. We're going to be focusing on mental health, and I think it's really important because I feel like a lot of the materials that we focused on this semester has been very gender or race incentive, but mental health does not recognize race, does not recognize gender. It affects all of us. And, obviously there's a lot of implications that come into play based on, male, female, white, black, minority or not. But, and it's such an important issue and cause right now. And joining us now is our Module 14 mental health guest speaker, Dr. Andrew Jacobs, a renowned sports psychologist, a pioneer who has been, a part of the sports psychologist industry before you were saying that it was really even relatively defined. You've worked with players from Kansas City Royals, the Chiefs. You are on staff with the Kansas City Current, the women's professional soccer team, and have worked with Olympians. Dr. Jacobs, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Danny, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
I'm sure I did not give your intro justice, but take us through how you got into the field and some of your career highlights that have meant most to you.
Well, I played sports my whole life. I'm almost 70 now, and I was a tennis player was my main sport. I played tennis and golf growing up, but I choked a lot when I played tennis. And back in the 60s and early 70s, I had no idea how to fix it. I was always getting too nervous, and I lost matches I shouldn't have lost because of that. And when I was in grad school, I went to Vanderbilt University undergraduate. Then I went to the California School of Professional Psychology in San Diego, and it was a 5-year year-round program. And my second year, there was a class called sports psychology, and I thought, oh wow, this looks fun. And there were 8 of us in the class. It was a very small school, and 8 of us in this class. And 5 minutes into the class, I'm like, this is what I'm doing. As the professor was Dr. Robert Nidifer, and he wrote a book called The Inner Athlete, which I went down to the beach after class. That was one of the benefits of being in San Diego. I went down to the beach and read the book cover to cover, called him up that night and said, this is what I want to do. And we ended up setting up the first internship. Every year we had an internship that we participated in. We set up the first sports psychology training internship at San Diego State my last year, where I worked with the tennis team and women's gymnastics team. And that's where it really clicked for me. This is something that needs to be done. And then I moved back to Kansas City. On my drive back, I interviewed at the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, and with the assistant head of sports medicine, and he said, quote, "We don't need to interview PhD types running around here telling us what's wrong with our athletes." After I talked to him for 15 minutes explaining that the East Germans and the Russians, in addition to the drugs, also use mental training. And I ended up getting hired. That was August of 81. In June of 82, I got a call from the Cycling Federation saying they needed a sports psychologist, so I'd be willing to work with them. And that got me started. But when I moved back to Kansas City, Danny, I interviewed with 4 of the local colleges here. None of them were interested. In fact, one of the athletic directors, as he threw his cape over his shoulder and walked away, said, "Hey, we're not interested in this. I don't believe in hocus pocus and witchcraft." So I'm like, okay, so that didn't work. But my first job was actually at the University of Kansas, where the track teams hired me for $5 a day, 1 day a week, to work with them. And that started, and that's sort of where my career began. And we won the Big 8 indoor and outdoor track championships that year. The men's team did, and they doubled my salary for the next year, and also included lunch. And things started to take off. But when I first started, there was all this negativity about athletes don't need to talk to somebody. Come on, they're athletes. And I'm like, athletes are people. They deal with stress, they deal with anxiety, they deal with notoriety, relationships. They have the same issues everybody else has, maybe in a different way because they're a competitive athlete, but they still have the same issues. And throughout my career, the cycling team, as I said, hired me. And in 1984, we won 9 medals, hadn't won any in 72 years. I worked with them for 8 years, went to 3 world championships. Our indoor professional soccer team in the early 80s hired me. I worked with them. And in 1990, the Royals hired me, where I was one of the first sports psychologists in baseball with them. So things sort of took off, but things would come and go. There'd be a managerial change, an ownership change, a administrative change, and usually somebody like myself was the first person out the door because there was still a lack of really awareness and understanding of the importance of it. And that's something I fought my whole career and talked about forever. Um, I started my radio show. I've been on the radio now 33 years, and it's something I talk about all the time. That mental health is so important, and then we've finally seen in probably the last 5-6 years
Hmm.
with athletics. Really, it started with Kevin Love when Kevin Love, the NBA player, had an anxiety attack with the Cleveland Cavaliers. They didn't know what it was. He ended up in the hospital before they realized it was an anxiety attack. And then he has become a very outspoken person about mental health. Of course, Michael Phelps has come out and talked about his alcoholism and all the other issues he had. I recall when he, after the first Olympics he participated in, he got caught smoking a bong. And, there's all this stuff about, oh my God, what's happened to it? And I'm like, you know what? And I've worked with swimmers my whole career. I've worked at Kansas City club team. I worked with for 33 years. We had 8 Olympians, and I worked with all of them. And the pressure these kids are under is enormous. And I think for Michael Phelps, it's like all he ever did was swim, train and train and train. And so he just wanted to be a normal teenager, not the smoking a bomb as a normal teenager, but that, he wanted to just start doing stuff other kids did. And of course, that developed other problems. But we've seen Naomi Osaka, Simone Biles talk about, the issues they've had. And so it's now become something that's really, I think, a hot area in sports is mental health, sports psychology, the whole mental side of performance.
I relate to so much of my teachings back to my experience within media. And you hit it right in about 5-6 years ago, right around that 2018, 2019, there was a big push for us to cover athletes' mental health stories, to create documentaries, initiatives. If there was a story to be told, that's something that, as media, there was not only incentive, but there was interest from sponsorship viewers to talk about it. You did mention Kevin Love, but a lot of these names, Michael Phelps, Naomi Osaka, Simone Biles, a lot of these are individual sports. Um, why do you think we're seeing leaders emerge in the sports mental health field on the individual side and less of it on the team sports? Do you think that that's just more of a fostering environment, or they're more empowered in the individual sports?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you how I'd answer it. I always like to say a good coach is a good psychologist, or excuse me, a good coach is a great communicator, and good coaches are good psychologists. A bad coach needs a sports psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
What I find is that a lot of coaches have been reluctant to apply someone to work with the team because they want to be the psychologist of the team. And there's
Mm-hmm.
always been a reluctance on a lot of their parts to have somebody like myself involved. They're threatened, their egos are too big. I've worked with some coaches who wanted nothing to do with me, and I've worked with some coaches who are like, you're the most important person here. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it looks a lot of it on where they're coming from and their perspective. Um, Individual athletes have been a little more open to it because it's a one-on-one type of thing. You can deal with them with their issues, and they're willing to talk about it. Whereas I think with teams, it's harder because of the whole hierarchy of the organization and who's in charge. And then there's one of the issues that I've dealt with and worked with, I think pretty successfully, is the role I have with the team. You know, who first of all, who employs you, who pays your salary. Um, and every time I've been hired, I've been very clear. Look, what I do with the individual athletes is confidential. It's between me and them. If there's something that they feel the coaches or the administrators need to know, then we'll talk about it. But other than that, I'm not going to share stuff I do with them on an individual basis within a team. And that's where it's worked pretty well. What I found is there have been several coaches I've dealt with over my career who didn't like that. They want to know everything that's going on. They didn't want me around because if you're not going to tell me what's happening, I'm not going to deal with that. And I'm like, well, look, there are certain things that I can share with you, and there's certain things I can't. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think within teams, the role of a sports psychologist is different for every team. It depends on, as I said, who hires him, who's paying the salary, how everybody understands the role. Where do you fit in the hierarchy of everything that goes on?
We are sports, gender, and race class. From your expertise and experience, have you noticed any trends or patterns? I shouldn't say trends, but patterns within race or gender that you see for mental health concerns that come up within?
I think female athletes have been, for the most part, more open-minded to working with someone like myself. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
there's been just the other day I saw an interview with Stephen A. Smith um, on one of the morning talk shows, not ESPN, another talk show, and
Yeah, I know he's got a book out because I had a few people reach out saying, "Hey, do you can you connect me with Stephen A. Smith?" So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But it was very interesting because he shared his depression about his mother dying,
Mm-hmm.
um, and how he's been dealing with that. Steve, I was interviewed by him in the '90s, a show called Quite Frankly with Stephen A. Smith. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
my impression about him, he was a pretty gung ho, hardcore guy, um, and that's the way he comes across on his shows. Very opinionated, very open about saying what he thinks. But here he is sharing, "Hey, I've had to deal with my mental health," and so
Mm-hmm.
and he talked about, and there was a uh, mental health professional on with him who talked about how Black men are more reluctant to talk about it than others. There's that stigma about talking to somebody who's weak. I mean, I've worked with many Black athletes throughout my career. I mean, I got to know Bo Jackson very well when I worked at Kansas City Royals, the greatest athlete of modern time, in my opinion. Bo Jackson, he had no problem talking to me. He saw it as a sign. What he did, he said, "Doc, there's nothing wrong talking to you. It shows I'm strong." I mean, I think that there is that stigma, though, with a lot of minorities about talking to a mental health professional, that it's a sign of weakness. But we're slowly breaking through those barriers, I think.
What do you think outside of athletes, sharing their story has been the biggest, catalyst to our mental health advocacy that we're seeing across sports?
I think the fact that there's more and more research coming out about mental health in general, just
Mhm.
about how when you have a stronger mind, you'll have a stronger body. You're a better person.
I like that.
And so many people uh, forever saw this as such a weak area, but now we're seeing people talking about it across the board, um, talking about the importance of mindsets and attitudes and perspectives, and just mental health is no longer, I think, looked at in the way it was 10, 15 years ago. I think when somebody admits they have a problem, it's a sign of strength. And we're seeing more and more people across the board, whether it's athletes, musicians, artists, actors, actresses. Um, I was interviewed on CNN last year by Pamela Brown, and she talked about in there. She shared in our interview just a little bit about how she has to deal with stuff. So I think that we're seeing more and more people in prominence share the fact that, hey, I've got some issues. So I think the openness to mental health across the board is becoming more accepted.
Do you think that there's a league in particular, the NHL, their resources? I know NBA has changed their policies and their mental health um, healthcare that they offer to their players. Is there a league in particular that you think, hey, I think that they're doing it right? They're a good model.
Um, that's a hard question to answer. We don't have an NHL team or an NBA team here in
Mm-hmm.
Kansas City, so I'm not
Mm-hmm.
working with any of them. I know that there is more of a movement now by all the major leagues,
Mm-hmm.
major sports leagues, to implement that. I mean, the NWSL, for example, the Women's Soccer League, requires every team to have a mental health professional on staff. And a couple of years ago, they had all kinds of issues with coach abuse and all kinds of things. So that prompted them to really work on the necessity and importance of having someone like myself on a staff for a team. And I think I know the NBA has been very active in that. Major League Baseball per se as a league doesn't promote it as much that I'm aware of. Although there are a lot of teams who bring people in. Rob Thompson, the manager of the Phillies, is a good friend of mine. I've known Rob since he was the catcher at the University of Kansas baseball team in the '80s when I worked with the teams there. And Rob shared with me he worked with the Yankees for a long time, and then he's been with the Phillies for what 3 or 4 years now. Is the last 2.5 as their manager. Took them to the World Series 2 years ago. That they have like three mental health professionals on their staff. So every team does it differently. There's no, to my knowledge, no Major League Baseball guideline what you have to do. So I think it's really up more to the ownership and the management to see the importance of it. I always like to say, Danny, you can have two athletes who are physically the same, but the one with a stronger mind will come out on top. And a stronger mind doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be stronger at their performance. It's being stronger as a person.
You mentioned Chiefs, obviously coming off of a Super Bowl championships. You have worked with former Chiefs players, obviously being in Kansas City, being a Chiefs fan. Hypermasculinity is a topic that we keep revisiting over the course of the class. And after the Super Bowl win, a big topic of conversation was that Travis Kelce, Andy Reid fight on the sidelines.
I thought you were going to talk about Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. I mean,
yeah, that was also a big story too. Just a bit of the headline there. But looking at hypermasculinity in sports, and are there different sort of social acceptance within sports when you see that? Or as a sports psychologist professional, are you saying like, that's an old school mentality mindset to think about?
well, that specific. I was at the Super Bowl.
Oh man, bury the lead.
Well, I've been at. I went to the very first Super Bowl in 1967
Uh-huh.
with my father and my oldest son and I have been to the three Super Bowls we've won um, these last few years. So it's been just a tremendous experience to go through all that. And with all the years the Chiefs weren't any good, so it's been a lot of fun lately. But that specific thing, yes, there was a lot of talk about that incident where he pushed Andy Reid on the sideline, and yeah, he went too far. Obviously, what he did was too far. But the competitive juices were flowing. He wanted to get back on the field. He was frustrated. The team wasn't playing well. They have a close enough relationship that Andy Reid. I sure didn't like that. I mean, Travis Kelce even said I wasn't trying to knock him over. That was an accident to push him. But he's even admitted afterwards. I probably shouldn't have done that, but my emotions are flowing. I wanted to get into the game. You can look at it two ways. I think one is that behavior is not appropriate in any sense in life, but in the
Hmm.
course of a competitive situation like that, where your intensity is going strong, you know, it is accepted in some places. I'm not saying it's right, but it is accepted. And in that situation, their relationship was close enough. They just moved on from it. Andy Reid knew he just wanted to play from what I've picked up. I haven't talked with either of them, nor do I know them. But I think that the perspective I got was that was just more Travis Kelce was frustrated, wanted to get out there. He didn't want to lose the game. Whereas several years ago, Travis Kelce picked up a flag and threw it at an official and was taken out of the game. And then earlier this year, he had a situation where he slammed his helmet down, and Andy Reid, one of the attendants, wanted to give his helmet back, and he said no, he's not
Hmm.
getting his helmet back. So I think
In the training camp fight. So I mean, there might be some behavioral patterns.
yeah, I think, but that's where what I've seen with coaches and athletes throughout my career is, when they have a good relationship with an athlete, sometimes some of these things are they let them get away with it. I'm sure I would almost guarantee you they probably had to talk about it after everything the Super Bowl's over, and they probably talked about that a little bit. And Andy Reid probably told you can't do that.
Hmm.
And Kelce, I've never met him, but he's obviously he's become very prominent now with Taylor Swift and everything. But he's an extremely competitive guy, hard worker, driven. I mean, the players that I've worked with have told me, he's one of the last guys off the field every day. He's always busting his butt out there. So he's an extremely competitive athlete. Doesn't mean that's acceptable, but I think in the course of a game, a competition like that, sometimes that type of behavior is allowed to happen a little more so than in a normal situation.
What I'm trying to, okay, so you talk about an elite level, Super Bowl as big as it gets. Do you think, professional athletes at the biggest stage have heightened mental health concerns that they're dealing with, or do you see, these same pressures at every level? And I know that you do a lot of work with youth sports as well.
Well, that's a great question too. I think what I always tell professional athletes these days is if you made it to pros, you survived youth sports. Um, Youth sports has gotten to the fact my book that I co-wrote right here, Just Let Them Play, Guiding Parents, Coaches, and Athletes Through Youth Sports. And co-wrote this with Jeff Montgomery, who's the Kansas City Royals Hall of Fame closer, and Pete Malone is in USA Swimming Hall of Fame. We talk about developing athletes and learning and growing, and I think the elite level athlete, the professional athletes who've gotten to the very top have as I said, they've survived youth sports, high school, collegiate. They obviously are physically superior, but in many ways mentally superior too, because the group of athletes today, and you can talk about the PGA Tour, and you listen to Scotty Scheffler just won his second Masters yesterday. He's talked about his mindset and how important that is. I think athletes really at that level not only know physically they have to develop themselves, but mentally they have to develop themselves too. And so there's a much more of an awareness today of the importance of mental health at people at that level. But they still have a lot of the issues. The divorce rate for professional athletes within 3 years of retirement is enormous. There was a study several years ago, it was over 70%. So is there, and you've been aware of your work with athletes, all these things that go on, and so one of the problems today, and we're on social media right now, Danny, and I talk about social media all the time. I tell professional athletes stay off social media during their season. Don't look at it, don't post it. If you have a site, let somebody else post stuff on there for you. Don't you get into it, because I work with a lot of field goal kickers. And I work with one of the best ones in football. And it's like if he misses a game, well, take the Kansas City Chiefs Buffalo Bills game, for example. Tyler Bass, the Bills kicker, missed I believe it was a 39-yard, 40-yard field goal towards the end of the game that would have tied the game. It went wide right. 2 days later, he revealed he got off all his social media sites because he was getting death threats. And I'm sitting there thinking, this guy missed a kick and he's getting death threats. I mean, that shows the level of mental health in society. So athletes have to deal with so many things. How they deal with their notoriety. And I mean, I've been out to dinner with many athletes, like professional athletes I've worked with, and people come over. They don't care this person's eating dinner. They just want to get their autographs. I've been with people who stick notebooks and things in people's faces when they're eating. And one very prominent NFL kicker that I worked with for a long time, we went out one time and walked in a restaurant. We were with another kicker, and he immediately had a negative comment made toward him. 3 seconds later, this guy came over and asked him for his autograph. And his response was, "You just said this to me, and now you want my autograph. I'll be happy to give you an autograph, but why don't you realize I'm a human being too, and that wasn't necessary." And the guy turned bright red and apologized. And this guy gave him his autograph, as did the other kicker. But I looked at it. When you're a prominent athlete, you have to deal with so many other issues. I mean, you may be married, you may have kids, you've got to deal with, you're a human being, you're a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister, a husband, a wife. You may have kids. You've got to deal with all these things, and how everybody perceives you is so important. So I think it's when you get to that really elite level, there's something I think that's allowed them to excel and maintain that level, but at the same time, they have to be very sensitive to how they come across and how people perceive them in the public. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, no, it does. And I think that it's really insightful. You said something in particular about staying off of social media. There's a lot of student athletes in the class, and what are some key measurable factors that they can do, not just as student athletes, but as young people, that you would advise to strengthen your mental health? I mean, I find CBT training very effective. There's meditation apps. There is, journaling apps. What are some key components that you would tell the students?
Well, I've worked with visualization my whole career. In fact, when I got started, nobody really heard of the term visualization per se. I have relaxation visualization exercises on my website I sell for pitching, hitting, swimming, tennis,
Okay.
bowling, running. I have a generic relaxation one. I think visualization training is a necessity now for athletes. As I said earlier, I like to say you can have two athletes who are physically the same, but one with a stronger mind will come out on top. What's a stronger mind? A lot of that has to do with mental training, visualization, learning how to relax, learning how to deal with stress, making stress a motivator rather than a distractor. And um, how they get to that point is different for everybody. I mean, female athletes have to do with different things than male athletes. An athlete on a team has to do with different things than individual athletes. But I think a lot of it has to do with balance. Danny, that's one of my key words is balance. How do you balance your life at when you've got things that are stressing you out? Are you dealing with them or avoiding them or blowing them off? And I've got a Super Bowl jersey right here from one of the Chiefs players, and he has the letters FOE on there. Stands for focus on effort, and that's something I've talked about. Fo versus for. FOR is focus on results. And this individual is a very, very religious guy, very dedicated guy, family man, great person, and he's balanced. He's been working with me for several years. We worked on balance. We worked at how to keep things balanced. And if he has a game, and he really does, fortunately for him, really has a bad game. But if he has a bad game, he doesn't beat himself up. He looks at why it didn't go well and how can I improve it the next time, because he's learned to deal with that. And social media stuff. When he first started seeing me, I told him get off social media, and he told me that's one of the best things I ever told him. So for the collegiate athletes in your class, I think the mental side of what you're doing, physically they're in the weight room, they're getting treatment for injuries, things like that. What are they doing mentally for themselves? I call it PFAC: preparation, focus, attitude, and confidence, the keys to success. Preparations: how do you get ready, not just to go compete, but to take a test physically, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, nutritionally? What are all the things you do to get ready? Focus is about what are you concentrating on, but what are the distractions internally and externally that can get in the way of your focus? You can have either a positive, negative, or realistic attitude. I always talk to athletes about a positive, realistic attitude. Positive is you want to do it great. Negative is I suck. Realistic is it's going to be really hard today, but how can I do the best I can? That's a positive, realistic attitude. And that takes us to the foundation of all of it, which is self-confidence. And self-confidence to me is the ability to believe in yourself and your skills, but not worrying if you fail or stressing or getting all blown out of proportion if you succeed. To try to keep it balanced. I mean, confident athletes. I have all these athletes that come in and sit in the chair right behind us here, and they say they're perfectionists. And I'll go, well, who's perfect? And then they sort of stop. Well, nobody. I said, okay, so are you happy? Well, no, that's why I'm here, because I'm a perfectionist. I'm not perfect. I said, right. Well, instead of focusing on being perfect, how can we focus on you doing the best you can?
Mhm.
Because I don't care. Well, my third, fourth chapter in the book is let me pull it up here for you. Embracing failure can lead to fun. Okay, so I talk about that all the time. I mean, what's perfection in sports? It's basically non-existent. George Brett, the Kansas City Royals Hall of Fame third baseman. I know George. I was with the team in 1990 when he won his third batting title. 300 is his major league average, 330 or something like that. He's in the Hall of Fame, which means 7 times out of 10 he failed. I mean, this year the Kansas City Chiefs field goal kicker Harrison Butker probably the best kicker in football, missed 2 kicks. He didn't make all of them. I mean, in fact, the first kick he missed was in December. He hadn't missed a field goal or extra point all the way to then, and the referees did not blow the balls up all the way. Okay, they didn't inflate the balls up all the way. Of
It
course, it
was
was in.
before a Deflategate.
Yeah, well, it happened to also be in New England, which is sort of interesting. But anyway, but so he missed a kick in the first half, as did New England's kicker, because the balls weren't inflated properly. He had missed a kick all year.
Mm-hmm.
But what did he do in the second half? He came back and kicked a 50-something yarder, which showed his mental strength. So I think learning to deal with failure, learning to deal with losing, learning to deal when things don't go your way is a sign of mental strength, because instead of flipping out and losing it, you got to look in the mirror and say, okay, what happened today? Why did things not go the way I want? And that goes back to those 4 words. Was I prepared properly? Where's my focus? What kind of attitude do I have? And where's my self-confidence?
I loved in your podcast, you talked about FOE, focus on effort. I mean, I'm not a professional athlete. I'm not even a good athlete, I would tell you, but I do run marathons. I run them slowly.
I'm
But
jealous.
I run them slowly, but I have found that I find so much rewarding in the journey and the training,
Yes.
and that effort. And talking with a lot of professional athletes, that's one common ground that I have found with them is sometimes after the win or the season's over, that feeling, that letdown, because that portion, that structure is over. Dr. Jacobs, one thing, you talk about the yips or the twisties in gymnastics. When you see these anxieties in athletes or mental health concerns manifest from a physical and physicality, do you approach overcoming them the same way as you do when you maybe not see them manifest in a physical form?
Yeah, well, whenever anybody wants to work with me, I
Mm-hmm.
give them some forms of why are you here, what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
We identify the things, and so something like the yips, I've dealt with that forever. The oldest person I've ever seen
I
was
have
an
a
eight.
lot of baseball players in the class, so this is good.
Okay,
This is good feedback.
well, I'm working right now with 2 catchers who can't throw the ball back to the pitcher. They can throw it to third base and first base, but not to the pitcher. The
Mm-hmm.
oldest person I ever had in my office was an 81-year-old female golfer. And when I asked her, why are you here? She said, quite frankly, Dr. Jacobs, my putting sucks, which was pretty interesting. But we got that worked out. And the yips, okay, there's two ways I've dealt with that. One is some of the people that come in that have, quote, the yips, it's something that's just started lately in their catch, whether they're a catcher or second baseman or something like that. They have the trouble throwing the ball to first. There's something to do with a failure that recently happened, and then somebody says something to them and they start thinking too much.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have some who've had the problem on and off. Typically, when they were younger, what happened was when they failed or had a mistake, they had a coach or a teammate or a parent make derogatory comments to them that are stuck in their head, and it's always sitting there. And so that's where I have 5 lists of things, Danny, that I have people write out after my first session that they bring back their goals, strengths, weaknesses, fears, distractions, and stressors. And then we identify those things and work on them. And so if you've got the yips, like I said, it may be something you've always sort of had, or maybe something that's happened recently. Then we try to identify that. But part of the solution and solving that goes with the visualization and relaxation work. I mean, there's been all this research done now on visualization, and athletes who take the time to visualize and relax prior to competition have a 75 to 80% chance of being better than if they don't. So that needs to be implemented in their preparation and learning about breathing and relaxation and focusing skills. And that's where all that comes in very handy.
How do you see contact sports and mental health correlated?
Well, the word that pops up is concussions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, and I've worked with a number of professional soccer players who we had Kansas City, the Sporting KC, the men's team here. I've seen players from them over the years, and we had two players on the team, two stars on the team that got concussions on successive plays. One guy was out for a week, and the other guy who worked with me was out for 3 months. Um, the intensity of contact sports, the concussions now everybody talks about it. It's across the board. It's an issue you got to deal with. I've got an NFL player I work with he's with Jacksonville. He just was a free agent, and he's had 5 concussions in his career. He's
Mhm.
told me if he has one more, he's probably going to hang it up. It's something he has to deal with. He knows it's something that's there. Um, Contact sports, there's a physicality issue of injuries, of things like that, and I think when you have fear, fear. One of the big things I do with people is fear. Okay, uh, if you're afraid to like you're running a marathon. Okay.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter how fast you're going. Are you doing it? Or are you afraid to do it because you're afraid you're going to pull something or strain something or step on something? If you've
Mhm.
got that fear, then you're not going to do it. So we try to identify where's that fear coming from? Why do you have that? What's that about? If you're going to play a contact sport, you're going to hit somebody. You're going to get hit by somebody. It doesn't matter if it's, football, you're padded up, soccer, you're not. I've worked with soccer teams for my whole career, and guys get, male and female, they get hurt. I mean, it's just part of the game. So if you're afraid of it, you increase the chance of getting hurt because that fear is in your mind. You're thinking about it, then you're tenser.
I was just, yeah, that was, that's just something that really resonates as well too. Sometimes fear can lead to more injury.
Oh, definitely. I mean, football is such a scary sport because of the Damar Hamlin situation with Buffalo playing
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
Bengals a couple of years ago, and I worked with this one player on the Bills who was actually one of the big leaders in helping them to deal with all that. And he said, Doc, we had guys who were freaked out. We had guys. He died on the field, came, then they brought him back. He goes, we had guys who were freaked out who are not sure they want to play anymore. And this individual said, my son will not play football. I mean, this guy's been an all pro, and he said, my son's not going to play football. I just see what happens. So, but then you have people who, it's like, hey, it's the greatest sport in the world. Look what it's done for me. I think this is where the whole mental perspective, Danny, to me comes in. Why are you doing what you're doing? What are your goals? Where do you want to go with it? What do you want to accomplish? And and that's where the fear issue comes up. If you've got fear, fear is going to hold you back. I'll give you an example. This is public knowledge. When I worked at the University of Kansas, like I said, the track teams hired me initially, and this individual's been on my podcast, so I can share. His name is Paul Titus. He's a high jumper. Paul was a senior 1980, 81, 82 season. He'd never jumped 7 feet. He always wanted to jump 7 feet. Well, he's a senior. It's his last meet of his college career was back then the Big Eight, now the Big 12, but the Big Eight outdoor track championships in Norman, Oklahoma. And we worked on visualization and relaxation, and I was down with the team there. And he did 6'8", 6'9", 6'10", 6'11" on his first attempt, and we're in the infield sitting there, and he looks at me and goes, I'm at 7 feet. I said, yes, you are, but who cares? Just keep jumping. You're doing great. Well, he not only jumped over 7 feet, he cleared it by about an inch and a half. And he'd never done that his whole life. Not only did he do that, then he cleared 7-1 and I think a quarter, and then he was done. But he got third place, and he called my show a couple years ago when I had anniversary of my 40th year at work, and Paul called the show and talked about how working with me helped him with mental training, but with relaxation and visualization, it really got him to not be scared. I mean, that was a barrier in his mind, and it was interesting. He'd never jumped there that high, and then he finally does it, and he goes higher because the fear went away. The fear, and that's with the contact sport or non-contact sport. When you have fear, that's the biggest obstacle I've seen in all sports.
Dr. Jacobs, thank you so much. Where can the students find you? Podcast, website for the visualization exercises. We're so grateful for your time.
Sure, it's been a pleasure talking with you. My website is winnersunlimited.com, WINNERS unlimited.com. You go on there, and scroll around under the store tab is where you find all the relaxation visualization stuff. And all my radio show is live every Sunday morning, 7, 8 a.m. in Kansas City. It's 810whb.com. And the shows are podcasted everywhere, all the podcast apps as well.
Yeah, it was great. That's where I love learning about FOE and everything that has resonated and inspired.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I really enjoyed this, and hopefully the students will get something out of it as well.
They will. They will. Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Andrew Jacobs. A few things that really struck out to me that I liked was talking about stronger mind, stronger body. I feel that mental health is your health, and the two should not be separated. And then I liked his FOE. He talks a lot about that on his podcast, focus on efforts over results for the best results. I'll post access to his visualizations resources, especially for baseball athletes out there. I know that he works with a lot of baseball athletes. Okay, so want to go through the rest of the lecture that I have for you. We have this was a survey that I thought was really interesting of NCAA college athletes from 2022, talking about the mental health support and resources and the differences you'll see by gender. So I know where to go on campus if I have mental health concerns. 69% women, 63% men, about even where it's I know how to help a teammate who is experiencing an issue. I think that's all about being a supportive teammate that we have. I would feel comfortable seeking support from mental health provider on campus, about even. My teammates take mental health concerns seriously. We're going to see a big difference between 65% women agree, while only 58% male. Is that a trend that we see across gender and gender biases that we have? I feel that student athletes' mental health department is a priority of our athletic department. This what I thought was interesting, 55% male while only 47% female. We saw this similar result when it comes to my mental health concerns are taken seriously, 59% male. That's about 10% more than the female respondents who were at 50%. It speaks out to me about Ann Myers-Drysdale, who was one of our early guest speakers in the semester. And she talked about the opportunity that you see that coaches saw and the negative side effects from Title IX for female athletes, and them not always having female athletes seeing that support. And I think that is evident here in some of these results. But know a lot of you are student athletes, or you were a former athlete, and it's important that you're taking care of your mental health and prioritizing it, both as an athlete but as a human. And these are some of the mental health concerns that elite athletes in a survey that came out. 38% of female student athletes report mental health concerns. That's almost 15% higher, where 23% of male respondents said that was their concern. Athletes are twice as likely to experience anxieties compared to non-athletes, which is surprising because we do know the benefits of being athletic, of being active and leading an active lifestyle. But whether you're judging your performance is that when these mental health concerns come into play, when you do have twice as likely more to experience anxiety, according to the survey. And then around 40% of elite athletes may experience symptoms of common mental health disorders, which I find is very interesting. And that was why I wanted to ask Dr. Andrew Jacobs to talk about, hey, do you find that when athletes perform at an elite level, there is more mental health concerns that come into play, or is it at every stage? And I know that we talked about it briefly, but just really, youth sports and the pressures on student athletes, on youth athletes as well too, and why. And where that stems from. Is it the pressures from parents, coaches, society, social media, and what triggers these factors? We're gonna loop it back to the previous, working backwards. I'm hopping all over, but I want to close up our chapter on. Hold on, guys, 1 second. This is the wrong slide I have here. All right, guys, here we go. We are sharing my screen again. Want to revisit the highlights from the discussion board on NCAA women's athletes in sports. Thought that it was really exciting and fitting about the success that you saw in the women's basketball tournament, and what that means for the future of women's sports. Let me reshare this. It keeps saying that the screen is paused. So hopefully you can see these discussion questions, and wanted to highlight some poignant comments that you guys talked about in the discussion boards. Kira talked about how race came into play with women's coverage, with the media coverage of the women's tournament. How the UCL Bruins were known as the American Sweetheart, and the LSU Tigers were known as the basketball villains. You could also see this running theme with the coverage that Caitlin Clark got versus Angel Reese. So, yeah, I mean, and I think of media, we're always looking for the good versus evil, the Cinderella story that you want to gravitate towards, and recognizing that unconscious bias and how that can lead to negative implications that people can think about and associate with athletes. So Kiera, I thought that was interesting. Looking at some of these discussion boards, talked about will unionizing college athletics change NIL? For the most part, everyone agreed that it was important. Zach talked about, I think unionizing athletes could be helpful for all athletes, but it could hurt college athletics in some aspects. The way college sports are now is how college sports have always been. I don't find it a terrible thing. Everyone is free and able to go when they please, but I can see how unionizing can get players to feel as if they have more power. Keon, you also talked about it too. Where are you, Keon? Thinking about how unionizing will also hurt college sports. If college athletes unionize, there will be a ton of issues between universities, the NCAA, and athletes. As a former college athlete, I don't see a point in unionizing at this level. With NIL in play for NCAA as well as transfer portal, college athletes already have a ton of freedom to do what they want, which is insightful. If college athletics do unionize, it's going to be a lot more regulated. And, I think that you won't see it as top heavy, where you're going to see a lot of empowerment for the standout and the star athletes. And I think unionizing will give the all athletes some more rights. Someone also put on here the aspect of healthcare. I think that was Sean. Sean talked about the perspective of unionizing, essential for the broader context and motivations behind calls for unionization of sports, which I think is really important. Olivia, after listening to the podcast, I think athletes unionizing will hurt college sports because in many cases it will cause too many issues between the athletes themselves as well as different colleges or conferences. Yeah, paying athletes, offering athletes benefits like healthcare or pension, it's not going to subsidize these lower other sports, and it'll be a balancing effort. Balancing the benefits of unionization or increased athlete empowerment with potential changes will require ongoing discussions and careful considerations of other various factors. Sean, very insightful on it. Right, let me make sure I've got all the points that I wanted to bring up. So we talked about how unionizing college athletics will change it. Let's go into how will current NCAA talent impact the WNBA. A lot of people talked about the rivalry continuing between Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. We've got the WNBA draft tonight. I think Angel Reese most likely going to LA, who has the #2 pick. A big market where there are going to be continuing sponsorship deals, where there is going to be more TV exposure, is going to be important. I think it's going to be interesting how Caitlin Clark going to Indiana will play out. Will she see the same support? Indianapolis is a great sports town. Are you going to see the same railing around her like you did at Iowa? And will Caitlin Clark see her sponsorships follow her to the WNBA? Because as of right now, she'll probably see a pay cut with the league salary being at about $80K capping out. And that's why you do see a lot of WNBA players going overseas, why you saw Brittany Griner having to play in Russia, a lot of WNBA players playing in China because, the salaries are not there. So that's, what I'm most likely going to, interesting in a story that I'm going to be following. The WNBA Players Union does have the option to reassess and opt out of their current league contract and renegotiate. And whether they do it now or they see more empowerment to do it in a few years when they do see TV ratings or sponsorships, increasing and what is the appropriate play. Some notable concepts. So yeah, a lot as Zach talked about the Caitlin Clark Angel Reese matchup, agreeing that with these stars coming in more talent to the WA, I think it should be looking at those seniors and getting very excited because women are revolutionizing the game. The way that Caitlin can shoot and the way that Angel can play in the post and mid-range is something that I think have been perfectly hyped up for the media to allow women's basketball to explode. Annie, our guest speaker last week, talked about, the reach of the similar excitement that you saw centered around the NBA in the 80s, and that we're seeing that right now within the WNBA. Andrew, I like this quote that you pulled out, that the amount of money that is now being generated off women's sports is over $1 billion, which is a 300% increase since 2021 per CNBC. I think a big reason for that is TV rights and social media exposure for sure, but we didn't get to see a lot of the professional women's leagues or college sports have a lot of eyes on them, but we do now. Even though the women's tournament had more ratings, they actually generated less revenue than the men. And that's because of how TV advertising dollars are bought. They're bought prior to, so they're sold. And, if you can predict these storylines, but ratings are ratings, and that's why there's usually a ratings minimum that advertisers have to meet versus hey, they can't go back and charge people more because there are more viewers. Though in this case, I think for the women's basketball tournament, they wish that they could have. And then, another common thing that was on the discussion board is why you see success for women and NIL. And that's marketability and that branding to be able to communicate with their followers on social media. And that's why women athletes are sometimes more of an attractive NIL sponsorship. It goes back to, looking at from a sports marketing perspective for so long that you want to reach more of a sports fan base. And that is the opportunity for women's sports, because they do intersect and transcend into pop culture, into non-sports fans, to humanize and show their human interest stories, which make them more marketable and translate to more NIL dollars. Going back in, I know that broadcast renewals was a big topic. 2024, the National College NCAA Women's Championship and Women's Soccer being renegotiated. TV rights for the WNBA are up within the next year, so that's going to be really interesting, especially when you see that influx of talent. UConn, South Carolina, the big names like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. And you're seeing that the audience and that the viewership is there. So that's something I think, if you took my sports marketing class last in the fall, and something that I continue to talk about is, hey, the NBA TV rights are up. I think that the conversation needs to switch to WNBA and their TV rights. Sorry, this graphic's really blurry. I couldn't get a bigger picture of it, but 14.2 million viewers on ESPN. It peaked at 17 million. It is the highest ESPN audience for any basketball game on record, and the second best non-football telecast ever. What I also think that is important and is exciting for ESPN, because so much of their investment is on ESPN Plus. It was the most viewed college event on ESPN Plus ever. And that includes the college football playoff. So an exciting time for women's sports. If you're interested in working in sports, I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities there. So it's important that you are well versed and are following these sports. Okay, we are going to go back to previewing our next module. So we had Dr. Andrew Johnson be our guest speaker this week. You'll write a guest reflection on that conversation, and hopefully, I know that a lot of you guys are athletes. Hopefully you found that insightful. Ozzie Guillen is going to be our guest speaker for next week when we talk about Latin, Hispanic, and their role as a culture and society within sports. I worked with Ozzie at NBC. He's a dear friend, and you never know what's going to come out of his mouth. So I'm looking forward to that. And then we've got our final exam April 30th. I'm in the process of writing it now. I will let you guys know how it's going to be, but it'll be essay based. I'll give you guys the topics ahead of time, and I think that it's important that you're going to pull the best quotes from our guest speakers, as well as from our Blackboard materials, and you will reference them within the final exam essays. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you for your patience and the delay for the posting of the module, but Daniel Carcillo had to reschedule, and I wanted to stay on time as much as I could, so that's why I grabbed in Dr. Andrew Jacobs. Have a great week, everyone. I'll be posting the materials for this week's module tomorrow, so appreciate your patience. All the best.